Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to be talking to you today about an animal called Moeritherium. Stand over here so you can see. So this is a reconstruction of Moeritherium. It's the only genus in the family Moeritheridae, and it's known from the late Eocene to the early Oligocene. Now, it's a proboscidean, which means it's related to modern-day elephants. But unlike modern-day elephants, you can see that it's often reconstructed as being semi-aquatic. And they've got it here feeding on some semi-aquatic plants as well. So proboscidea are part of the Panungulata, but really the proboscidean, really the proboscidean lineage is part of a larger radiation of Afrotheria. And this is really the African leg of the adaptive radiation of mammals which happened after the KPG mass extinction in the early Cenozoic. So proboscidea form part of Panungulata along with Saurenians and Hyraxes, so pictured here. And within that, I've shown this hypothesis of Tethetheria, where we have proboscidean more closely related to Saurenia. But actually, these relationships aren't particularly well understood at the moment, and almost every possible pairing has been proposed for Panungulata. So we're not really sure exactly how these three clades are related to one another. So within proboscidea, Moeritherium is more basally branching than things that you might more classically think of as elephant-like, so the modern elephants and the more recently extinct mammoths. But although it doesn't have things like tusks or a trunk, it does have these large procumbent incisors at the front here and at the top of the skull as well, so upper and lower jaw. But what I really want to talk to you about today is this new material. Now, this is, you can see a really nice skull that we have here. It's 3D and particularly nice specimen. We also have an associated lower jaw, and this has almost complete lower dentition. So this really brings us to our first aim, and that's to establish whether this new material is a new species or whether it shares affinities with one of the species that's already been named for Moeritherium. So this Moeritherium specimen comes from Birket, Qarun in Fayum, and this is in Egypt. It's actually one of the oldest Moeritherium specimens ever found, and it's dated about 37 million years old. And Fayum has lots of younger Moeritherium fossils as well. There are currently at least 3 Moeritherium species known. We're only going to talk about 3 today because others have been synonymized more recently. And they're all from these sites. And as the clade Afrotheria would suggest, they're all from Africa, northern Africa. So if we now have a look at some of the temporal ranges, we'll start with this, one of the oldest. This is Moeritherium chebarameri. And this is only known from teeth, and it's been dated at around 37 million years old, but there's a little bit of uncertainty around those dates. We have our Birket Qarun Moeritherium, and that's been dated really well at about 37 million years, so overlapping with the Moeritherium chebarameri. We have Moeritherium lyonsii, and this is known from older than 37 million years and younger than 34. So there's a possible small amount of overlap down here, but it's mostly younger. And we have Moeritherium trigodon, which is quite a lot younger, from 34 million years to 31. So we really want to establish whether any of these 3 known species look anything like our new specimen. So if we start with the youngest, Moeritherium trigodon, so this is a reconstruction of its skull, and hopefully you can all see that there's quite a lot of differences here. I don't think I need to point out too much, but particularly the zygomatic arch is very wide and a different shape, and here the anterior part of the rostrum is quite different as well. So we don't think it really looks like anything like Moeritherium trigodon. Moving on to lyonsii. This is another reconstruction of the lyonsii skull, and at first glances this is looking much more similar to ours, but there are still some differences here. So most notably, if you look at this part of the rostrum, it actually flares out anteriorly, whereas ours tapers inwards. And if you look in lateral view, ours has a much smaller sagittal crest, and its dorsal margin is concave rather than convex. So again, we don't think this is the same species. Now, Moeritherium treberameri is the most recently named species, and this is actually only known from teeth, isolated teeth. Now, when this was named, it was thought of as being quite unusual, slightly more primitive than the others, and that's because it's much smaller for a start, and it also appears to have semi-lophodont dentition instead of the bunodont dentition known from other Moeritherium species. And what that means is you can't see the individual cusps very well. You have this kind of loaf that transverses. So if we now have a look at our lower dentition from this new specimen against a composite of the dentition of Moeritherium treberameri, first of all, they're very comparable in size. So this is a small specimen as well. And secondly, there are some really notable similarities in the teeth here. So we have similar kind of lophodont dentition developing here, or semi-lophodont, and this shape on the P3 is very similar here. So at this preliminary stage, we suggest that we would like to tentatively refer it to the species Moeritherium treberameri. But I just told you guys that treberameri is known for being quite a lot smaller than the other species. This actually isn't the only specimen that was found in the Birket Qarun formation. Now, this is the specimen that we are working on currently. These ones, as I understand it, are still in Cairo, and they're not available for loan right now, but some of my collaborators have seen them and studied them in a little more detail. And the teeth of these two, and others like it, are all very similar from Birket Qarun. But this one is about a quarter as large as this one. So this is about 300 millimeters, and this is about 400 millimeters. So what we did is we plotted some of these tooth sizes. So lower P3 tooth size. The Birket ater species is the Moeritherium treberameri, and these ones are our specimen is down here, one of these two, and the larger ones plot up here. So what we can see is that you might actually have kind of a bimodal distribution of tooth size and possibly cranium size here. So again, tentatively, we might suggest that you have a little bit of sexual dimorphism within the Birket Qarun Moeritheriums. If we plot in other Moeritherium tooth sizes from other formations, again, you can see, so firstly, you can see that ours now fall, or specimens that are similar in tooth morphology to ours now fall within this range that was already known for the size of Moeritherium. But also, you might also be getting this bimodal distribution of body size again. This brings us to our second aim, which was to identify structures that might be able to be used to understand the relationships within Proboscidea and Panungulata. So we scanned the material, and this is the first time that a Moeritherium skull and mandible has been scanned. So we've got the skull and the mandible. And I'm just going to point out some things that we think are really interesting from this mandible now. First of all, the tooth row. Now, when you find isolated teeth of Moeritherium in the fossil record, they often don't have their roots attached, and they've never been scanned before. So this is the first time we've seen how big its teeth roots really are. And this really explains why we don't find them when we find isolated teeth. They're just too big to be pulled out of the jaw, and they're destroyed. So it has really large tooth roots. And in particular on M3, so this is looking at the back of M3, and this is looking forward into the jaw. You can see that not only are they large, but they actually splay outwards into the jaw, and they really they penetrate down right into the jaw, the lower mandible. But what's really interesting for us is the size of the mandibular canal. And the mandibular canal is a hollow in the lower part of your jaw, and through it run the arteries and veins that feed blood and nerves to arteries, nerves, and veins that feed blood and nerves to your teeth and your lips. And in Moeritherium, it's really, really large. So it takes up almost the whole of the mandible. So you can see here as well, it's moving in and around the tooth roots. And it also bifurcates here. And the shape and size and position of the mandibular canal has been used in Proboscidea before to understand their phylogenetic relationships. So we suggest that we now have an idea of what Moeritheriums look like, and this could possibly be added to studies done before looking at these characters. But also, within Panundulata, those relationships that are not wonderfully well understood yet, we can now see that early proboscidea, like the Moeritherium and this Palaeomastodon, which is slightly younger, have very large mandibular canals, whereas things like hyraxes have very small ones. But dugongs and manatees also seem to have relatively large ones. It's not quite so easy to see in this picture, but they are also quite large in comparison to the jaw size. So just a few concluding remarks, that we suggest that we have the first cranial material from Moeritherium with teeth comparable to those of Moeritherium chebarameri. We may have some sexual dimorphism within the Birket Qarun Moeritheriums and also other Moeritherium sites, and that CT scanning fossil proboscidean mandibles may help to identify characters that we can use to really understand the relationships better within Panundulata. So just a few people to acknowledge, particularly Bill Saunders for inviting me to work on this material with him, and